Hi and welcome to the Unquendor Guitars workshop for another part in the video series where I'm building my very first single cut guitar model. My name is Daniel and in this episode I'm going to start making the guitar body. I've got my beautiful piece of black limba which I'm going to use for this guitar body ready to go, but before I start cutting it I want to make an adjustment to my templates. In my templates I want to add the control cavity and the cavity for the three-way switch as well, so I can route them straight away. And while I'm at it, I'm going to also make the templates for the covers for these two cavities. So yeah, let's start with those. To determine the size of my template, I made this little routing diagram in AutoCAD, and I want a template that allows me to route all things needed for the cavity. So I want to be able to route the cover plate, I want to be able to route the control cavity itself, and of course I want to be able to route a little latch or a little lip for the cover plate to sit on when installed into the guitar body. So what I've drawn three lines, and the inner line, the dashed line, is the actual cavity itself where all the electronics are going to be. The other line is the outside of the cover plate, so the cover plate and of course the little lip, the outside of the little lip the cover plate is resting on in the cavity. And the outer line, the most outer line, is the size my template needs to be. And it is a bit oversized, so I can use different guide bushes, and I use this diagram to determine which router bit I need and which guide bushings I need to use. For example, if I using my smallest guide bush, so an 8mm guide bush with a 6mm router bit, and use an offset for my template in comparison to the outside of the cover plate of 7mm, this allows me to use this template to route the outside of the cover plate, so I can use it directly on the material or maybe on a scrap piece of MDF to first create a template just to be sure for the cover plate itself. On the guitar body I can use this 7mm offset template and a 20mm guide bush and still the 6mm router bit to route essentially on the other side of that same line, so I get my first part of the control cavity, the little lip where, if all goes well, the cover plate should fit in perfectly. And I can route that in the guitar body just 2 to 3mm deep, depending on the thickness of the cover plate of course. And then for the main cavity I can use a 30mm guide bush and still the 6mm router bit, and I can route the entire cavity, and this gives me a nice little lip, 5mm offset of the lip for the cover plate to rest on. So that's what I'm going to do. I'm going to stick this to a piece of MDF, cut out the intersection, and I should have a base template which I can use to copy it into the actual guitar template. I've got the first part of the template done, and I've already used it to route out the control cavity cover, and if all goes well I can use this as a template as well to route out the actual control cavity covers. What I'm going to do now is use this template on a thicker piece of MDF and do a test route to see if everything fits, so that the I've got a nice fit between the cover and the cavity itself, and if all goes well I can copy this template onto the master template for the guitar body, and then I'm ready to go and finally start working on the body itself. So it's time to copy the test template to the master guitar template, and fairly easy job. I know I need a 13mm offset from the edge of the guitar to the edge of my template. So I'm going to draw in a 13mm offset line, align my template to those lines, cut out the most of the material using my jigsaw, and then with the template attached to the guitar template I can use my router table and a bearing guided router bit to clean up the edges. Then the last thing I need to do is make a template for the three-way switch cavity, and then this template is done. I've been working on the template for the cavity for the three-way switch, and at first I wanted to use the same technique I did for the control cavity and the control cover plate, but unfortunately there isn't enough space available on my template to account for the offset of the router guide bush. And then I remembered forstner bits, and I had a couple of large forstner bits available to me, but unfortunately even the largest sizes I have are still a bit on the small side. The three-way switch barely fits in, and I have to bend these little solder lips to the side to fit it in, and the largest one I have leaves too narrow of a ledge for the small little round cover plate to sit on and have space for the two little mounting screws. So I have to order a larger bit, a larger forstner bit, because unfortunately the store I went to get one was out of stock, so I have to order one, and that means I will have to drill the cavity for the three-way switch at a later stage, unfortunately, but no problem, I can still continue cutting out the guitar body. And now for one of the most difficult parts in any guitar build is deciding which side of the body blank to show as the front of the guitar. And yeah, in my case I like both sides. I like this side a lot because there's a bit of dark streaking going on. The only downside is this one that is right up against the center line of the guitar, so it will be off center, and that's something my mind doesn't take very well. I also like the other side, but it's a bit more plain, a bit more even, and some might say it looks a bit more boring, but yeah, I'm going to look at it for a while and decide which side to use. Then of course I'm going to trace template onto the body, cut it out on the bandsaw, attach the template and use my router table to route out the circumference and to clean up all the edges. So yeah, I'll be right back. very quick little tip on using a router table, because I see way too many pictures on Facebook and Instagram where people have tear out on their guitar bodies and necks while using a router table. This has mainly to do with they trying to remove too much material with a router table, and sometimes have sharp edges still on the body or on the neck or whatever they're trying to route, left by the bandsaw. As you just saw, after cutting out the body on the bandsaw and attaching the template to the guitar body, I used my spindle sander just to remove most of the excess material and to make sure, especially in the tight corners, that there are no sharp edges left by the bandsaw. And the other thing is, be confident in using your router table. I'm using the best router bits I can get and make sure it's a fairly new one. And also, for those who don't know, I use a Triton router in my router tables, and it has a speed control, and I'll dial it down from the 5th setting, which is the maximum, to the 4th setting, just to slow it down. And this makes it a lot smoother to use on the router table using a fairly large router bit. I'm using a 16mm diameter router bit, of course with a guide bearing on the bottom. So that's one thing. Slow down your router ever so slightly when using a larger router bit. Be sure that there's not a lot of material to be removed by the router bit. Again, with all routes, take very shallow passes and be very confident. Don't be scared of your router table. Don't take it for granted either, but you have to be confident. When I started using a router table, I was very scared, and I pushed my workpiece too gentle into the router. You don't have to force it in. It's a balance. You have to have a sturdy grip and pressure, constant pressure on your router bit at all times. As soon as you hesitate and you accidentally shift your workpiece back and forward ever so slightly, the router will most likely catch. So be confident in your passes. Keep a constant pressure to your router bit and take it very, very slow. So yeah, I have to hurry up a bit because it's nearing 10 o'clock, and at that point I have to be quiet in my workshop. So I have to start up the dust extraction, start the router table, and hopefully get this routed before the neighbors start complaining for me making noise at night. So yeah, let's go. So I've got my nicely routed guitar body now, and I hope it showed up on camera that I didn't have any troubles, any tear out whatsoever. I could even route these very narrow and tight corners and pointy edges and such without any issues whatsoever. Yeah, and that's, hopefully this shows you that you can route a guitar body in one go without having to resort to the so-called downhill only routing, going against the rotation of the router, and so on. It just takes a bit of preparation before you start using your router. Yeah, and work on your routing technique. Be confident, take it slow, so slow down your router, slow down your cutting speed, and take off the smallest amount possible. Yeah, you saw me switch over to a small router bit with a top guide bearing, and that's because my other router bit wasn't long enough to do the entire guitar body, including the template, and I didn't want to remove the template because I first want to route the back cavity as well. It's getting late, so I have to wait until tomorrow, and for you in just a couple of seconds that I start routing the control cavity. So time to start routing the control cavity, and I'm all set up. I've got my body clamped to the table. I've got two offcut pieces, one of the body and one of the template, clamped down next to the body, and this is just to give me a bit more surface area here on that very small edge to keep my router nice and stable. I've got my 20mm guide bush installed with a 6mm router bit. And you might be wondering about the rope that's hanging from the ceiling, but that's just to hold up the hose for my shop vacuum, so it doesn't get hung up or snags on the edge of the table, which might cause my router to shake. So just a precaution for that. Yeah, all ready to go. Just remove a piece of masking tape inside the cavity, and I'm going to do the first pass, a 3mm deep pass, and that's for the ledge where my control cover plate is going to rest on. So the routing is partially done, and now you can see what I meant in the beginning of this video while creating this template, by creating different offsets with the use of different size guide bushes. And I have my cover plate template I made with the same template, and it should fit perfectly. And now you can see the different offsets for the first route with the smallest guide bush, second with one step larger, and the last one with even a larger guide bush. But I have to confess, this last bit I did with a 4mm router bit, and this just gives me 1 more millimeter for this ledge where the control cover plate is going to sit on, and it makes it much easier to fit in the screws on the edge. I don't have to put the screws at 2.5mm from the edge. I can have a bit more play for the screws. Next thing I'm going to do is take my pillar drill and a forstner bit and remove most of this inside material, and then I can use a larger router bit with a guide bearing to clean up the edges using the newly created face here on the inside by the 4mm router bit. I'm going to leave about a centimeter, so 10mm of material on the top of this guitar body, so I have enough material left to do a nice and carve, and I can be sure I don't carve all the way into the control cavity. And if need be, at the end I can always use my router and another bearing guided router bit to, if needed, deepen out this cavity some more, or just use forstner bits to very locally deepen the cavity for the potentiometers. Almost identical setup as before, and I removed the template from the body, clamped again an offcut from the guitar body to the bench, and I'm going to use a bigger router bit with a guide bearing to clean up the edges of the control cavity. And of course clamp the body to the bench as well. A nice and clean control cavity, and the cover fits perfectly, and I found a nice piece of black limba. It's the cutoff from this body, and hopefully I can use this to match the grain of the back of the guitar to make a control cover plate from. Yeah, and of course I'm still waiting for the forstner bits to arrive, and as soon as they're in, I'm going to drill the cavity for the three-way switch as well. So the next thing I can do and start with is making the neck pocket, and as soon as that's in, I can figure out where the bridge is going to sit, drill the holes, route the cavity on the back, and do the pickup cavities, of course. So we made a lot of progress, and yeah, let's continue. So slight change of plans, unfortunately, and that sometimes happens. Just when I was about to start the cavity for the neck joint. My forstner bits arrived, so I'm first going to drill the three-way switch cavity as intended. And first I'm going to use my new 45mm forstner bit to drill a 3mm deep recess, and that's for the control plate, or for the cover plate of course. And then I'm going to use a 35mm forstner bit to drill the rest of the cavity and leave again 10 to 8mm on the top of the body. Those forstner bits made it very easy to create this pocket. It took me less than 5 minutes, and I'm very glad I chose to wait for the forstner bits to make this cavity. And yeah, that is where I unfortunately have to end this episode. But that means in next week's episode I'll have more time to explain a little bit more about how I go about creating the neck joint. So that's an upside. I hope you liked this video, and if you did, please leave a like, and if you're new to my channel, please consider subscribing and hitting that notification bell so you get notified when I upload something new. So next week, like I said, I will continue to work on this guitar body, and I hope to see you all there. But until then, have a nice week.